Hey everybody, so it is week 2 of the Main Line. So the Main Line is our new online live video series where we're going to bring on different guests internally from Marion, Maine and externally from the industry to talk to us about a host of different topics within the industry and beyond. So I'm so excited to bring it to you. My name is Hope Wiseman. I'm one of the owners of Marion, Maine and one of the creators of the Main Line. Thank you so much for being here with us. You can meet us back here every week, every Wednesday night, usually at 6 p.m. But tonight we have a special presentation beginning right now, 7 p.m. On this Wednesday night on Cannabis 2.0. So we're going to take it a little bit further, talk about how cannabis affects the medical community, and really get a little bit deeper into the science behind cannabis, a little bit more than you're used to hearing. So that's why the presentation is entitled Cannabis 2.0. We're gonna take it a little bit deeper than you're used to. So I want to introduce our guest that we're bringing on today. He's very special and has a lot to share with us. So I want to introduce to you Dr. Itamar Simhon. He's a board certified family nurse practitioner. He earned his bachelor's in nursing from the University of Maryland in 2008 and began his career in the intensive care unit at suburban Johns Hopkins Hospital. In 2012, Itamar became the clinical nurse manager of an advanced wound care clinic at Washington Adventist Hospital. During his tenure, he earned the prestigious Center of Excellence Award for wound healing rates and patient satisfaction rates. In 2017, Itamar earned his master's degree from Simon's University as a family nurse practitioner and furthered his expertise by becoming a board-certified orthopedic nurse practitioner. So let's welcome Itamar Simhon.
Thank you very much, Hope, and thank you, Marion, Maine team, to have me on this platform and talk about Medical Cannabis 2.0. So, as Hope was saying, I'm a family nurse practitioner, and I'm also an orthopedic nurse practitioner. And I started my nursing career in ICU, then wound care, and now in orthopedics, which I take care of people with musculoskeletal pains. The common denominator that I find throughout my nursing care was that it was very hard to treat and recover and rehab people that are in pain. That's the common denominator. Now, what made me passionate about cannabis was many years ago. I was in the Israeli army and I got injured. And I had a severe injury to my right leg, and I had to go through numerous surgeries, etc. During that time, I was given, what's usually given in the hospitals for pain, which was narcotics, and it did alleviate some of my pain, but it also caused a lot of side effects, and I decided that the side effects were just not worth it. And then during my rehab, my long rehab, it was months and months, one of my best friends told me that I should try cannabis. And just kind of as a quick background, I was always in sports. I was a gymnast in grade school, and then as a teenager, I was a cyclist. I was in the Israeli bicycling team, competing in Europe. And I was very much against smoking and drugs, cannabis, of course, but I was desperate. So I did try it, and I remember it because the first night that I actually tried smoking cannabis, it was the first night after 9 long weeks that I actually slept through the night. And then I knew, okay, this is not all that bad stereotype that I heard about cannabis. There's also some good things about it. Now, so to be honest, it's not like since that day I became an everyday user of cannabis. It's not like that. Now I'm 47 years old and I am using it, but it's kind of on and off and as needed. And so coming out of here, I want everybody that is listening tonight to know I'm not about to tell you that cannabis is going to heal all your aches and pains and make you feel better no matter what diagnosis you have, because it's not. We have to have realistic expectations of cannabis, and just like other types of therapies and medications, cannabis has its place in the medical world. So first of all, we need to define and understand some terminologies in the medical cannabis industry. The history of cannabis in the world, and especially in the US, and I'm from Israel, but it's by a chance also that Israel is one of the smallest countries in the world, but also a leading country with regards to research and development of cannabis and the treatment of cannabis, with cannabis. I want you to identify and describe the major cannabinoids, the actual substance that work on our body in cannabis, and the mechanism of action in the human body. Understand the risks and the controversies surrounding cannabis, and become familiar with some resources to further your knowledge after this presentation is finished. So terminology. Cannabinoids. So cannabinoids are a chemical compound that reacts with the body's meaning the internal, cannabinoid receptors. So in order for something to work on us, our body needs to be able to accept it. So THC and CBD are cannabinoids. There are 144, as of now, discovered 144 cannabinoids in various cannabis plants, each with a unique therapeutic effect. And by the way, this number 144 is going to change because as research develops, they actually discover that there are more and more cannabinoids in that plant. CBD, cannabidiol. Cannabidiol is a naturally occurring cannabis compound, a cannabinoid. It's present in all cannabis plants, including hemp. Hemp is cannabis with less than 0.3% THC, so you get no euphoria with hemp. It is psychoactive, however. It doesn't give you a high, but it does also work on your brain. Cannabidiol is versatile and possesses numerous therapeutic properties. Interestingly, it counters some of the main undesired effects of THC. Some people, they tell you, oh yeah, I don't like cannabis because it makes me paranoid or anxious. But CBD counter that. And that's gonna be introduced in this presentation a little bit further, how together these cannabinoids work much better than each one alone. THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. It was discovered in Israel in 1964 by an Israeli scientist called Dr. Rafael Meshulam. He's a chemist. A chemical compound in cannabis that after combustion becomes delta-9 THC and acts primarily on a CB1 receptors. Don't worry, I'm going to explain all of those definitions in a minute. It works primarily in the CB1 receptors, which is the central nervous system, which is mainly in our brain, and therefore it produces the euphoria, the high. It is also known to produce hallucinations. That's the undesired sometimes effect, side effect of it, and anxiety in some people. Now you're not going to be tested on it, but I found it really interesting, and also the proof of why CBD and THC work so well together. Look at those chemical structures for a minute and see how they both have the same amount of carbons, 21 molecules. They have 30 molecules of hydrogen and 2 molecules of oxygen. Both of them have exactly the same number, but there is a different variation of how they are attached to each other. However, this variation is so minor that in our body, if you think of a lock and a key, our body can accept THC in the CBD receptors and CBD in the THC receptors. And that's why you have such a nice, harmonious interaction of those two compounds. So that's the only reason I want to show you the chemical structure. I'm not going to go too deep into that more, but it's fascinating how these two are almost identical. All right, marijuana. It's a term that was actually started as a derogatory term for it, and in the same movement that wanted to criminalize cannabis. It originates from Mexican Spanish, and the exact meaning is not known, but there are several theories of why the name marijuana came about. One is that in the 1880s to the 1940s, the Spanish brought cannabis to Mexico to cultivate hemp. This also brought a wave of Chinese immigration to Mexico, and the word in Mandarin Chinese for hemp seed flower is marenwa, and the Mexicans pronounced it marijuana. Another theory is that in Spanish, the word for oregano is mejorna or mejorna, and the scientific name is also very close, majorana, and then the hemp flower resembles oregano, so they called it marijuana. These are the two theories of why it came about, but it was mainly used by a movement that wanted to kind of label that with immigrants. Hemp, cannabis with THC content below 0.3%, mainly grown for making cloth and ropes, and at some point it was used to make parachutes. Recently, as cannabis became legalized, then it was categorized as sativa, an energizing type of cannabis, and it's used for depression, headaches, and nausea. And indica, the more relaxing, to treat pain, inflammation, and muscle spasm, and also insomnia. These terms are actually different than the original categorization of hemp and cannabis. It used to be that indica was all cannabis with THC, and hemp was only the one that was without THC, and it was called sativa. But now, indica and sativa are the ones with THC, and we'll just go with that terminology from here on. All right, terpenes or terpenoids. These are very important components of the cannabis plant. It's the aromatic substance of the plant that emitting pleasant, to most people and some people, distinctive smell. The terpenes in marijuana have given the plant an enduring evolutionary advantage. Terpene oils repel insects and animals, while others prevent fungus growth on the plant. And that's why it lasted for thousands of years. Cannabis terpenes also bind to the same receptors located throughout the brain and the body and work in harmony with other cannabinoids. Here, I wanted to just give a very simple example of some terpenes in cannabis and show you how each one of those have a distinct therapeutic effect and why, now that it's medical, we can actually choose a certain strain, a certain brand, and a certain type of absorbing cannabis, meaning the route of administration, in order to get the most out of it. So for example, pinene or A-pinene, it's an anti-inflammatory and a bronchodilator. It helps memory, and it's also an antibacterial. So, for example, maybe about 70, 80 years ago, when physicians were prescribing, and they were, and I'll show you the numbers, in the US, cannabis, it was in a liquid form. You put it in a spoon and you drank it. They would give cannabis as a syrup to people with asthma. Why? Because they chose the type of cannabis that has a lot of A-pinene in it, because it's a bronchodilator, and people that had cough and wheezing were benefiting from it. And it helps memory, actually. And think about it. When you walk in the outdoors and you smell kind of the fresh smell of trees, it can be pine trees, mainly in pine trees, but it's actually present in other greenery. You feel like, and that's why people say, oh, I'm gonna go outside to clear my head. That came from walking in a forest or an area that is nature, and you breathe all these terpenes and you feel like you're clearing your head. It's because of pinene. Linalool, it's an anesthetic, meaning it's pain control, pain reliever. It's an anticonvulsant, which is very important to mention here, meaning people that have epilepsy can benefit from cannabis, and do benefit from cannabis with a lot of linalool in it. It's an analgesic, another pain-reducing effect, and it's an anti-anxiety, and it's found in lavender. No wonder lavender is so popular. Beta-caryophyllene, strong anti-inflammatory, analgesic, also pain-reducing, and listen to this, it protects the cells that line the digestive tract. If any of you ever taken ibuprofen, or Advil, or naproxen, these are all non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and they always tell you, be careful, because it can hurt your stomach. Here, we have nature-given plant that is a very strong anti-inflammatory. It has pain-reducing property, but instead of hurting your stomach, it can actually help it. And it's also found in black pepper. Myrcene, this is found in indicas, usually strong indicas. And it's creating that sedative effect and that kind of body relaxation, more so than even kind of sleepiness, but also muscle relaxation, because it's a strong muscle relaxant, and it is making you sleepy as well, so it's a sleep aid. It's also found in hops. If you ever drink just regular beer or IPA, which made out of hops, you will see that after an IPA beer, you are more sleepy. All right, and limonene, the fifth one here. So it treats acid reflux, it's an anti-anxiety, and it's an antidepressant, and it's also found in citrus. So imagine that now, when you can actually engineer cannabis and you want to give a person that has anxiety and because of that has problems sleeping and also tends to have musculoskeletal pain, those last three components, you bring them into one product and you got yourself a very effective medication. The endocannabinoid system. So that's what's in our body. The endocannabinoid system, ECS, is a biological system composed of receptors and neurotransmitters. It is divided into multiple subgroups. The CB1, you remember we talked about THC and how it works on CB1, the central nervous system, and the CB2, the peripheral nervous system. So THC works on the CB1 receptors. Anandamide. Anandamide is an endogenous, meaning it's in our body, cannabinoid neurotransmitter. Raphael Meshulam, that chemist, also found that neurotransmitter because he realized, look, if I found THC and I know that when somebody smokes THC, they get something happens to them, we need to find that thing in our body that actually allows it to enter and make that effect. And that was the neurotransmitter anandamide. And then his student, Shimon ben Shabbat, found 2-AG. It's too long for me to say, but I'll try it anyways. 2-arachidonyl glycerol. 2-arachidonyl glycerol. 2-AG. That's another neurotransmitter in our brain that accepts THC and various types of THC. And anandamide was a very nice naming of that neurotransmitter. Dr. Meshulam took it from Sanskrit language, which ananda means bliss or happiness. All right, CB2. CB2 receptors are in the peripheral nervous system, meaning in the rest of our organ system. It has an immunomodulation, meaning it can help our immune system. It has a hormone balance. So let's say, insulin, for example, is a hormone, and now there are types of cannabis that help with type 2 diabetes. And of course, in the peripheral nervous system, we have pain relieving mechanisms that can help us with the CB2 receptors. And this is just a picture to kind of demonstrate and list the different organs and the effects of each one of these receptor systems. So CB1 affect motor activity. So of course, a high THC can affect the way that we move in space, our thinking, motor coordination, appetite, short-term memory, pain perception, and immune cells. CB2, the gut, our stomach and digestive tract, the kidneys, the pancreas for diabetes, adipose tissue, so fat tissue. It's absorbed in fat tissue, and by the way, that's part of the reason why after you have cannabis, it takes it like 3 weeks to get out of your system, and it's still in your urine for that long because it's absorbed in our fat tissue and the muscle tissue. It's even getting absorbed in the skeletal muscles, in the bones. It can affect our eyes, and that's how you get that red eye. And it was found that some THC and CBDs can shrink tumors. That's for another presentation. And it has a lot of other effects. In fact, if anybody ever heard of the RSO, the Rick Simpson oil, it's because he came up with it after he had skin cancer. And you see CB2 receptors are also in the skin. And that's the only way that Rick Simpson, found relief for his skin cancer, and he created the RSO, the Rick Simpson's oil. The entourage effect. So I mentioned that earlier. In 1998, Professor Rafael Meshulam, again, and Shimon Ben Shabbat, his student, concluded that the cannabinoids together demonstrate synergy. Cannabis in its botanical form is more effective than when broken to its isolate components. And you can see it because pharmaceutical companies spent billions, tens of billions of dollars on creating isolate components of cannabis in Marinol, Nabilone, Canador, and others. Now, they do have therapeutic effects. I'm not saying that these drugs don't work, but they work in a very limited way compared to the entourage effect of the entire plant. Quick history. It's important to know what we are using and why, and we are thinking that we are really now getting so advanced when it's becoming medical or legal, but in actuality we're just fixing the mistakes that were made by politicians in the past. So first, to give credit, 600 BCE, the earliest medical description of cannabis appears in the Shannon Ben Chao Jing, which is the Chinese pharmacopoeia book. 1616, cultivation of cannabis sativa, meaning hemp. Back then, hemp was called sativa, for fiber in Jamestown. Actually, George Washington grew hemp on a plot of land that he called Muddy Hole. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and other landowners in the United States cultivated hemp. Imagine, one of the most important things of being an American is paying taxes. Hemp was so valuable that farmers were allowed to pay taxes with hemp. 1850 to 1942, both cannabis sativa and indica appeared in the United States pharmacopoeia, way back. And then in the 1920s, American physicians prescribed 3 million cannabis-containing prescriptions every single year here in the US. Then, as pharmaceutical companies became stronger with a stronger lobby, and also there was an agenda to criminalize cannabis. In the 1930s, it was under increasing scrutiny by the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Then in 1937, something named the Marijuana Tax Act. It was taxing and criminalizing the possession of sale in marijuana in all of the states. And there is documentation, numerous documentations that show that the American Medical Association opposed the act, but they just didn't have strong enough lobby to fight it. 1964, fast forward about 30 years, THC was discovered and isolated by Rafael Meshulam. 1970, cannabis became controlled, Schedule I controlled substance. So just so you understand, Schedule I controlled substance, it can't even be approved for research. And this is where the problem started. It's okay if you have a controlled substance, like poppy seeds, but if you have it as a Schedule I in 1970, meaning you can't even bring it to research. And by the way, it's one of the reasons why all these discoveries that I'm talking about happened in Israel. It's not because here there weren't smart enough scientists. There were, and they wanted to research. They just couldn't. So the NIH sponsored research in other countries like Israel, where it was allowed to be studied and used, etc. In 1992, the neurotransmitter anandamide, we talked about that, was found, and in the 90s later, more appeals and trying to declassify cannabis or marijuana to move away from Schedule 1, that's the same schedule as heroin, by the way, that kills people every day. So cannabis was scheduled exactly at the same danger level as heroin. And an interesting fact is that, I don't know if it has to do anything with it, but cocaine, that was used by a lot of attorneys and even physicians, is not a Scheduled 1 controlled substance. It's much less severe. And it can cause so much more damage, but in any case. So this is where we are even now, and that's why each state is legalizing or medically approving cannabis, and it's not yet federally approved. These are just pictures that I found from the 20s and 30s. And you can see that even big companies that even exist today, like Eli Lilly, which is a pharmaceutical company, had cannabis as a syrup. And they always made it in alcohol, just like some of the vapes have alcohol for the combustion and to make it effective. So then these syrups were mixed with alcohol to help with the absorption in our body for cannabis. How does it work? I explain a lot of it, but I have a short video that is kind of nice to watch. Hopefully it will start pretty soon. Well, I'll try this later. I don't want it to take too much time, but it's kind of summarizing everything that I talked about with regards to the mechanism of how it works and etc. Okay. Important considerations. So cannabis, it's a drug. Yes, it's a plant, but being a plant doesn't mean that it's completely harmless. Not every plant, just because it's green and grows and nature made it, is great. I mean, try to take a nap on a poison ivy, not the best experience, but yet it is, nature produced and very natural. So things that we should consider and be serious about when I prescribe cannabis to patients, I always go over what other medications they're taking. I think that I'm assuming that most of the population that is now watching this presentation doesn't need to take too many medications, probably a younger part of the population, but nonetheless, everybody's got some medical history. We need to know that cannabis interacts with several medications and drugs that are metabolized in our liver, specifically in the P450 enzyme. And for one reason or another, our body favors cannabis. So let's say I just took a cholesterol medication, any kind of like the ones that ends with a statin, atorvastatin. These are metabolized in the liver and need the cytochrome P450 in order to be absorbed in our body. But if I took that pill and then I smoke cannabis, my body will prefer the cannabis first, which means that that drug that I took, the other drug that I took, is going to stay longer in my bloodstream and not be broken down to be metabolized. So I can have an overdose of another drug because I just did cannabis. So in fact, some cannabis products can reduce your cholesterol levels because it does act on certain cells that do that, but that means that then you need to decrease whatever other cholesterol medication you're taking. Any drug that interacts with the central nervous system, sleep aids, so Lunesta, and even a first generation antihistamines like Benadryl, for example. If you took Benadryl and then you ingested or smoked a strong indica, you're gonna be sleeping very deep for a very long time. And waking up will be a little tough. So be aware of that. There's also anti-seizure medications that interact with cannabis. And so all of these need to be considered, and very importantly, antiretroviral drugs. So if you take any medication for HIV/AIDS, you need to be aware and need to know that they may need to be titrated by your prescriber if you also use cannabis. Now, it's not a contraindication, meaning sometimes the only simple thing you need to do is to separate the taking of each one by a few hours. Let's say you took your antiretroviral drug and only 4 or 5 hours later you took cannabis. There is no problem there. It's not going to interact with it. Your drug was already absorbed. So these are not contraindications, but just considerations. Side effects and risks. Short-term side effects, we know them. So dizziness, dry mouth, the cotton mouth, we all know that kind of sensation when it happens with certain cannabis. Disorientation, euphoria, confusion, and sometimes somnolence. But this even somnolence, you have to remember, cannabis does not act on the muscles that are responsible for our breathing. And in the central nervous system, it's not even acting in the brainstem where the respiratory rate is being produced in the autoimmune response, meaning you will never stop breathing even if you took a lot of cannabis and fell asleep. Rare but serious adverse events of hallucination and tachycardia and severe anxiety. So yes, people were hospitalized after smoking cannabis. Whether or not it was laced or sprayed with something else, we don't know. But there are people that reporting having regular cannabis without any other substance that had, really speeding heart rate, like 120 and 30 in a resting state, which is dangerous. So we should be aware of it. It's rarely happening, and but it did happen enough to be documented. Now, having said all of that, if any of you ever looked at the back side of a Advil bottle, we probably wouldn't have taken that drug if we read all the small print of what potentially it can do and what was documented that it did do. But it did it to a small percentage of the population, yet big enough to be documented. So the same goes for cannabis. Most of you are not going to experience these, but it's important to understand that it's a potential risk. A lot of work to be done. So the spread of misconceptions, which are completely biased and unfair about cannabis being a getaway drug. I never heard anybody from from the government talking about how alcohol on different college campuses is also a getaway drug that is very addictive and destructive, or tobacco, cigarettes. Tobacco is also a drug. So none of these are mentioned when talking about gateway drug, but cannabis was for decades mentioned as such. The conflict between the federal and state laws on the medical use of cannabis causes significant confusion for researchers and patients and prescribers as well. So for me, that makes life harder to prescribe and realize which one should be prescribed and when shouldn't I, etc. And by the way, CBD product, that law is just not enforced, but really CBD is considered part of cannabis, and it's not legal to sell it in any other store than dispensaries, but you can see it anywhere. So I'm strongly recommending you not to buy CBD at your local 7-Eleven, CVS, or whatever it is, because really there is no regulation. The law is really not enforced because they shouldn't be selling CBD. And the only place that you should get CBD is dispensaries, and there are a few legitimate places that have high quality CBD only products, but you need to do research about it. The DEA's most recent denial of 2 cannabis rescheduling petitions means that cannabis and CBD are still considered Schedule I controlled substance, the same as heroin. And let's say a dispensary owner reads about a great strain of cannabis that was developed in the West Coast, in California, or Oregon, or Washington State. They can't bring it here even if it's CBD only. Why? Because the laws right now are saying that even if the product was produced in a factory that also process THC substances, you can't bring it to Maryland or any other medical cannabis state. But think about it. How many times you read on a chocolate bar that it was produced in a nut-containing factory? There are kids dying from anaphylactic reaction to food allergies every day in the world, but it's allowed for candy manufacturers to produce their candies also in factories that were producing products with allergies, meaning nuts or eggs or anything like that. But if you wanted to get CBD, high quality CBD from a different state that also produced THC in that factory, that you can't do. So there's a lot of work to be done. Is cannabis right for me? So this is the $1 million question. Look, the state of Maryland is very laissez-faire about who can or cannot get cannabis. They really leave it up to us, the provider, to do the examination and determine whether or not cannabis is going to be right for our patient. honestly, and now we can't even do this examination because the Medical Cannabis Commission allows us to have a video conference, a telemedicine appointment to certify people for cannabis. And I think that there's going to be a presentation at some point by someone else about the process of how to become certified. But it's a pretty straightforward process. This is it. Basically, that's just the short kind of description of what you have to do. Log on to the commission website, upload the requested document that shows you're a Maryland resident, picture ID, your driver license, and then you're going to take a selfie as your photo that will show on your card. You pay the Maryland state $50 and you wait 30 to 45 days until you get an email that says that you've been approved, but you still cannot go and purchase cannabis because after you're approved, you need to be certified by somebody like me or anybody that is listed on the Maryland Cannabis Commission website. And I'm listed there in 2 locations, right here in College Park in Terrapin Care Center and in Rockville, Maryland. All right. I think that this is the end. This is resources and education that you can continue to learn. These are really great resources, some videos. Dr. Rafael Meshulam talks about cannabinoids. Ethan Russo is a phenomenal neurologist in the US that is a big proponent of cannabis use to many, many conditions. He's like the American godfather of cannabis. Mara Gordon, she's an entrepreneurist from the West Coast. She got into cannabis through her sister. She tells her life story on a TED Talk and how cannabis helped her sister. And now she is one of the leading manufacturers of very highly effective cannabis products. Very, very interesting person. Very nice to watch on TED Talks on YouTube. Dr. Caroline McCollum, she actually collaborated with all the people that are mentioned above. She's Canadian. She has a clinic in Canada that helps people. She's a medical doctor, and she, really specializing in giving medical cannabis that will be specifically specific for almost each and every single diagnosis. So her cannabis products differ and help people with different conditions dramatically. And the most important thing to know that for cannabis to be effective, it doesn't have to be with a high THC necessarily. Some of them do because the THC is part of the therapeutic effect, but you can get great effect of cannabis and function throughout your day, function throughout work without being too high, just finding the right balance. That's the most important thing. These are some of the resources that I've used to create this slideshow. Please feel free to contact me. This is another video that Rafael Meshulam is talking about THC, etc. This is it. If you have any questions, you can use the chat here to ask me any questions you want. Yes, for neuropathy. Neuropathy is something that can get a lot of help from mainstream medications, but not always. So from my experience in treating neuropathy with cannabis, that it doesn't completely blocks or stops that either tingling or numbness or even sometimes burning sensation, but it makes it into a much more tolerable, not as sharp, not as intense, and not as piercing type of sensation. Have a good night.